Welcome to ChamberChats, the Halifax Chamber's new podcast where we check in with the local business community, ask government the tough questions, and find ways to save your business money. For the foreseeable future, we're focusing on COVID-19 and the economic impact we're facing, along with available resources and tales of resiliency. Coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Halifax Chamber's new podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and your host for today. We started this podcast a couple of months ago now as a new way to reach out to our members and to the business community as we navigate COVID-19. And we're very excited today to have a guest join us all the way from San Francisco. Mr. Rana Sarkar was appointed Consul General of Canada in San Francisco and Silicon Valley in 2017 with accreditation for Northern California and Hawaii. He's also a member of Canada's NAFTA Advisory Council. Mr. Sarkar previously served as National Director for High Growth Markets at KPMG Canada and co-chairman of the advisory board at the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. From 2009 to 2013, he was President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canada-India Business Council. And in 2005, Mr. Sarkar co-founded Content Partners, a global content agency, which was sold in 2009. And in 2001, the advisory firm Rawlings Atlantic Limited. He began his career as a consultant at Roland Berger Strategy Consultants in London and Munich, and helped establish the Roland Berger line, or business in India. Welcome, Consul General, and thank you for joining us at ChamberChats.
Great to be here, and congratulations to the new podcast.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're excited about it. It's a lot of fun and great fun to be able to communicate to all of our members on a kind of more regular basis. But I think you have a guest with you today. Do you?
I do. I brought a ringer. So as way of background, I grew up in Halifax. Grew up in Fairview in the 70s, and so I have a great affection for Halifax and get there at least once a year, and have great aspirations for where Halifax can go, and particularly in the context of tech. And I brought with me my senior trade commissioner here in our team here in Silicon Valley. Is Terry Cowell, who's also a bit of a ringer from the East Coast as well. And I thought that, given Terry's background, it would be great to have him on as well.
Good morning, Pat. Thanks. And thanks for the introduction, Rana. Also happy to be here. As we talked before, born in Halifax, grew up in Nova Scotia, and my family's still in Annapolis Valley. So really excited to be part of this.
Well, that's great. Great to have you with us, Terry. And you'll be pleased to know it's 25 degrees in the Annapolis Valley today. And I'm pretty sure if it isn't now, that later this afternoon, the wine will be pouring.
We can hope.
So, Rana, I'm going to come back to you and ask you to tell us a little bit about your role as Consul General of Canada in San Francisco.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I just part of what we have about 16 missions in the United States, in addition to our embassy in Washington, and of course, it's Canada's premier diplomatic focus in many ways, just given the nature of the trade relationship with the United States. And don't have to tell you, there's been a few things going on recently as well. So as a result, our focus here in the West Coast is largely tech, believe it or not, and that comes in various guises. And of course, we do the traditional piece of activity out here, which are our consular work for our maybe 300,000 or so sort of Canadian diaspora folks that are floating around California, but we also do a lot of trade promotion work between Canada and California, and particularly Silicon Valley and the tech corridor. And so part of Terry's focus is leading our trade team, and we have an office in Silicon Valley in addition to San Francisco itself. And so we have a number of significant programs that go back and forth. But I have to say that, and part of the focus for us in California, Northern California, is what I would call tech diplomacy. And you don't have to tell listeners very much about this, in the sense that folks know that Silicon Valley is the cornerstone for at least $5 trillion of public value of companies that are both platform companies, but also companies that are really forging what the next economy is going to look for the rest of the world. And so we have to be here, as I say, offensively, to make sure our ecosystems are connected, make sure our tech companies are privy to what is happening, our venture firms and large investors are also privy, but also defensively, in the sense that there's a significant amount of activity down here, which we would say is creating the new rules of the road for tech in so many ways, and for our economy for the future. And if we're not here and present in some of those discussions, then we'll be the lesser for it. And so those are some of our big activities.
Wow. Well, I want to focus a little bit on tech as we get into this, but given that we're in a time of COVID-19, I want to talk a little bit about just how we're keeping goods and services kind of moving back and forth between Canada and the United States during this time, and during a time of border closures on both countries' part. Is government and do you have some responsibility in ensuring that the supply chain is open during this time?
100%. As you know, this is the first time in history the U.S.-Canada border has been closed in this way, and so it's a significant step. And it was a decision that was taken mutually by both countries, and with the proviso that we would keep trade flowing during this time, because there was a broad understanding that the supply chains on both sides of the border, because they're so intertwined, needed to keep going. And so there was concern in the early instances when the border was closed for non-essential travel, that goods and services might get caught up in that. There might be a slowing of goods and services, but we haven't actually seen that. And thus far, we've seen a fairly free flow of goods and services right now, and we're hopeful. I mean, as many of you know, I mean, this is a monthly renewal process that we're doing in terms of the closure. On the 21st of May, it was renewed again for another month, and we'll see what comes after that. But we're very hopeful that the goods and services will continue to flow.
Yeah, I'm sure government has lots of plans that they sort of think about and plan for, but having to shut down borders, I don't know if that's one that we all saw coming.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think anyone's seen this or would have even imagined this a few short years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So PPE, or personal protective equipment, has been a hot topic both in the United States and in Canada. Can you tell us how or if the U.S. and Canada are collaborating on the supply of PPE and the regular trade and merchandise services with the border closures?
Yeah, thanks. On personal protective equipment, I think that early on in the crisis, when we were, I think all countries around the world were scrambling for particularly masks, N95. Medical grade masks and ventilators at that stage. And as that sort of scramble was going forward, there was a move to nationalize supply lines in many different ways. And there was maximum concern probably about a month ago about this issue. We had a brief flare up on the issue of N95 masks with 3M. And a potential for a restriction on exports on that. But we worked through that issue with the United States. And partly it's based on this idea that the masks actually have components manufactured on both sides of the border. The pulp for the N95 3M masks, in fact, comes from Canada. And just making the various forces in the United States and the U.S. government aware of the kind of circular flow of that supply chain was key to really resolving the issue. And I think that now that FEMA was put in charge in the United States of managing their supply of protective equipment. And we've been working quite closely with FEMA. A number of Canadian companies have been actually working on supply as well. And as a result, I think that over the last month, we've seemed to have resolved many of the issues on personal protective equipment.
Oh, that's great. Well, you'll be pleased to know, and Terry will as well, that we've seen a lot of switches from organizations in Nova Scotia who are now producing PPE that weren't before. In fact, Stanfields, who you may know, who make underwear that is distributed right across North America, have now switched and are making gowns by the thousands that they're shipping again all over North America for health workers. So it's amazing to see the changes that have occurred. Some countries are out of necessity turning to government isolationism, difficult word to say, for supplies or food or medicine or PPEs. Given that there's not a particular end date for COVID-19, although I think we're coming to a close, although I'm sure it'll still it will still be around, but we're at least seeing improvements health-wise everywhere. Will this affect the USMCA or are there provisions inside the USMCA that can reduce this isolationism?
I think, in fact, the long lead up that we had to the USMCA was quite the relationships that were involved in that were quite effective in resolving some of the isolationism and the concern around PPE, particularly. And so I think that in some ways the USMCA has done a great service just in the context of the relationships that were in place to do that. But more specifically, in terms of trading agreements around this, I think that the fact that the USMCA was thankfully passed before the crisis, the fact that it exists and has confidence on both sides of the border, I think gave the U.S. administration, us and Mexico, confidence to work more collaboratively on many of the sort of the joint health concerns. Also, I mean, there are many components of that. Like you mentioned Stanfields, and I think that's a great example. And also the automotive supply chain has been really been mobilized by this crisis, and so you have many of the U.S. And Canadian automakers, and then auto supply as well, from Linamar, looking at making ventilators and other products, to GM itself, to Volvo, which is working on both sides of the border. And so there's great examples of how the supply chains that were supposed to be for USMCA or USMCA sort of derived are now being repurposed for a lot of these tasks. And because there's the kind of muscle memory of cooperation in that, I think that that's a great basis of working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you hearing from Silicon Valley businesses anything that businesses in that area are doing to support either themselves or medical staff that our businesses here could be or should be doing?
It's interesting. I mean, I think that the Bay Area, I mean, there's two types of responses that are taking place. And I think that one is the broader tech response of companies themselves, and how tech companies are both operating and in many ways, thriving in this environment, just given the fact that we're speaking on one type of technology that, is made possible by the backbone of a lot of the innovation that came out of the Valley. And so, all of the digital first companies and platforms are so they've been busier than ever. And so there's this kind of acceleration effect that's taking place in the Valley. On the other hand, there's also a bit of a pullback in sort of early stage venture financing. And there's been pullback in, some of the companies that have been, sort of very aggressive and have been, well funded from the beginning, and we're in a kind of a grow at all costs sort of mode. Now those companies are being are looking at much more their fundamentals in terms of economics, in terms of the way that they're investing and growing for the future, and what their cash requirements are. Yeah, the second sort of thing that you're seeing out of Silicon Valley is a result of the data analytics, the companies that are accelerating through this crisis, and looking at using a lot of the tools that the Valley has developed, and a lot of the companies in the Valley have developed, from tracing and tracking to working on the analytics side of the health response, to looking at the biopharma response, and also looking at the eventual sort of pharmacological response as well. And so there's lots of different partnerships that the Valley is engaged in. A lot of the major companies here. So I think that it's in oddly, I mean, it's a very busy time for the Valley right now.
And I'm sure many of those organizations have operations in Canada. Are they willing to? I mean, you're talking about the sort of the contact tracing and sort of, software that may allow people to track. Is that something that they're sharing with their partner companies or subsidiaries in Canada? Do you think?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, there'll be significant partnerships, and I put that at the university level as well, in the sense that one of the great attraction points for Valley companies, and when they're working with Canada, is the depth of our research in university communities, and so in any of these instances, when you're looking at either both a tracing and tracking technology, which of course would need to meet sort of privacy standards and a lot of the practices that we would want in Canada as well. Those partnerships continue to grow, but we're also, in terms of the virus response, in terms of the pharmacology and the various types of vaccine approaches that are taking place. They're also looking at partnering with Canadian universities and Canadian research institutions. And so I think that that's where you're going to see a lot more partnership. You're already seeing a few examples of early stage examples of partnership in that area, and there's certainly more opportunity there.
Well, that's great. Well, you'll be pleased to know that Dalhousie University in Halifax is actually testing a vaccine right now. That was announced at the end of last week, I think. So in cooperation with a Chinese company, not a Silicon Valley company, but with a Chinese company. So hopefully, as folks are trying different products and different vaccines in different areas, we'll get to a solution. Let's get on to Halifax for a moment. So Halifax has a very fast growing innovation hub, a couple of hubs, in fact. We've developed an innovation district. We're home to several world-class universities. Could you ever see Halifax becoming the next Silicon Valley? And maybe this is a place for Terry to jump in, because I think he's been here recently and visited some of those locations.
Rana, do you want me to jump in, or do you want to start?
Yeah. I what I would say, my only preface to that is that, listen, I think that Halifax is a extraordinary place with a lot of potential. The anchor for Halifax in this next era is the university's cluster that it has, which makes it unique for a city of its size. And as companies and as investors start looking further afield, as the valley starts to spread out, as it becomes possible to work in a distributed manner as a result of the technologies that we're speaking on, and as a result of that, cities like Halifax are going to become significantly more attractive, and that's where you have a real opportunity. Sorry, Terry.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was back in Halifax for work in September, and I was just really impressed, just with the burgeoning infrastructure. Talking to folks from InnovaCorp, visiting Volta, talking to different companies. You've seen the growth, unbelievably, just in the last 5 years. I was struck by the amount of growth. So I think, having a supporting infrastructure combined with, influx of talent, because it's always going to be about talent. and people want to be drawn to where other talented people are. And I think Halifax and Atlantic Canada has a lot going for it. And in recent years, for our own programming, our Canadian Technology Accelerator programs, we recruit cohorts from all over Canada. And I'm proud to say we've had some great companies, and then just in the last couple of years, from Halifax, from Fredericton, from St. John's. So it's great to see that influx of talent being shown up in the results.
That's great to hear. I think you're right. Volta is an amazing opportunity for the city of Halifax, but some of the investment in the last little while in oceans. So you've probably heard of the superclusters, of course, and Halifax St. John's was awarded the Ocean Supercluster funding of about $300 million, and that was on top of the Ocean Frontier Institute, I think, that's at Dalhousie University. There's been almost $500 million invested in Halifax in the last few years for ocean tech and for ocean. So I think maybe it's not pure technology or software as Silicon Valley might be, although you would probably argue it's a lot more than that. But there's certainly an opportunity, I think, on the ocean side.
Yeah, I would say that on the ocean supercluster thing, I think that's a terrific piece of policy that will have a long tail effect that goes back many years. And I just think back to my dad did PhD research at Dalhousie, and in the building that he was in was the Oceanographic Research Building, and so I grew up in the backdrop of some of that. Of the work that was taking place, and you really understood the depth of what was happening, both on the science side and also the practical side. But if you think about where global demand is going to be in terms of for global proteins, for the way that which we manage oceans, the aquaculture revolution that's taking place, and the kind of role that Nova Scotia could play in all aspects of that supply chain, it's very exciting. And so this is where the ocean supercluster work, I think, is really important, and certainly getting eyes from many different communities, including the oceans world, from the climate agenda to aqua farming and to bioag. So some very interesting looks in there. And what I would also say is that if I could put a little word in for clean tech as well. In Nova Scotia, and particularly around in storage, energy storage, the upcoming storage revolution as a result of electrification of vehicles is going to be a significant one. And given Nova Scotia's leadership, and particularly in Halifax around in the battery area, I think that's a terrific start as well. And I'd also say that one of the companies that I follow quite strongly here is a company called Carbon Cure, which is of course the injection of carbon dioxide into cement that increases the strength of the cement, but also reduces the carbon footprint of the project itself. And so there's huge opportunity for companies like that to grow out of Halifax and into the world. So we're very excited about all those spaces.
Yes, absolutely. And Carbon Cure is a great example. I sit with one of their senior executives, Jennifer, on the Dal School of Management board, and she's a great contributor. I suspect the labor costs in Halifax or in Canada are significantly better than they are in Silicon Valley.
By a few bucks, yeah. Terry, I don't know if you've got the number in front of you, but I think it's around a 30% differential between Toronto and the Valley, and you can imagine what it would be from the Halifax perspective. But I think that Terry's earlier point about access to talent as being sort of the key component. So it's not just the price of that talent, but it's the access of talent at scale, talent that sees multiple redundant opportunities for themselves. So it has to be a scaled opportunity for that talent to come, and then talent at different aspects of the growth journey as well. So you've got like the early stage talent, which you could have a lot of young people who are very good at doing very early stage things. But as you start to grow and mature organizations, as you well know through your experience, as you grow that mid-level of management to sort of scaling talent, product management and product delivery to sort of global scale growth functions, those are harder to get in places that aren't the valley, say, or aren't large scalable cities. And so the challenge, I think, for many places that aren't the valley or maybe a New York or Toronto is going to be, how can you create, clusters of talent that, that are deep enough across all of the different categories that companies need to grow, so that you can have a sustainable ecosystem.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And although I would say that Halifax has a significant amount of talent already, and just the local universities in and around Halifax, three universities in and around Halifax, and then the multiple universities across the province can provide that talent. We're also getting a huge proportion, an ever increasing proportion of foreign students coming to those universities as well that are enthusiastic about staying. Do you think do you think some of the recent U.S. immigration policies or conversations have created perhaps more enthusiasm for folks in Silicon Valley to open Canadian offices?
Yeah, let me defer to Terry after this, but what I would say is, I think that certainly, we're in a world where, as you note, one of the great attraction points for Halifax, of course, and the reason why it has this opportunity to sort of, to be, a city of scale in technology is because it's got the anchor points of the universities, but also people want to come there, and people have the ability to come there. And so the U.S. for the longest time has been, benefited from the fact that it was the number one destination spot for quality talent from anywhere in the world. I think that Canada is giving it a run for its money, not just in recent years, but for a long time, but accelerated perhaps by the fact that we really are leaning into sort of policies of open and trying to get folks to Canada. And so some of that is through, our really working hard with our university communities to ensure that we're getting a quality of talent, pipeline of talent that then has access to becoming Canadian and contributing in Canada. And so I think that's a key component of it. And we're also sort of working hard with things like the global skills strategy, which Minister Baines, when he was in the first mandate for the Trudeau government, implemented, which I think has gone on to become one of the most successful strategies of getting people and companies attracted, because you could get a visa in about 10 days or 2 weeks, and for top talent globally, which was unheard of. And so as all of these other countries were scaling back and were putting up barriers for talent, Canada was putting a welcome sign on, and that has not gone unnoticed. That's gone down extremely well, and I think that we hope that we're leaning into that going forward, even in the context of COVID. Sorry, Terry, I wanted to bring you into the conversation as well on this.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's absolutely right. I've been on this job for about 3 years, and when we were talking to Bay Area based companies that want to expand their operations into Canada, initially, the number one consideration then, as of now, will be talent. They're going to expand an office into Canada. They want to know they can find the right kind of engineers or coders or whatnot. And then the immigration issue is maybe a third or fourth or even fifth rung consideration. And we've seen that change. And today, right now, after they talk about talent, that's their number two consideration. There's a lot of interest in what Canada is doing, as Rana outlined with the global skills strategy. So we have seen companies in the Bay Area express a lot of interest in Canada's open, inclusive immigration policies. And I think that's a big draw because, as Rana pointed out, this is not just an American ecosystem here. It's a global marketplace. It draws, talent from all over the world here. It brings companies from all over the world, not just U.S. companies and startups, but global companies have an outpost here as well. So I do think, our competitive advantage of being an open, inclusive society with policies like global skills strategy has attracted a lot of attention from Bay Area companies with whom we speak to on a regular basis.
That's great to hear. That's really great to hear. Well, I think we're going to wrap up. Is there anything that we've missed that you'd like to add?
Just a quick word. I mean, it would be remiss me to say that our thoughts and prayers and feelings have been with the communities in Nova Scotia, over this last extremely difficult period for all the tragedies that have been visited on it. And what I would say is that I had the great pleasure of meeting Jen Casey when she was down here for the California Air Show, and she worked with some of our team on that. And we were really grateful to have done that. She was terrific. And so keep the spirits up in Nova Scotia, and we look forward to seeing as many of your companies as possible down here. And have a look at. I'm going to give a shout out for one of Terry's great programs, which is the Canadian Technology Accelerators Program. Which, Terry, I don't know if you want to describe in some detail. Maybe we can get some companies from Halifax to be applying to something.
Absolutely. And as I pointed out before, we've actually had some companies from Atlantic Canada come through a program. We have programs that basically help you enter the market by providing on-the-ground mentorship, access to local investors, access to local lawyers, and really how to succeed in terms of either raising funds or exporting or entering the marketplace here. Sometimes our programs can last 3 to 5 months, mostly virtual, but we'll have an in-market portion. Some days we'll just have a 2 to 3 day boot camp. We offer programs in areas like digital technologies, cyber, clean tech, ag tech. We had an auto tech program last year, which will continue. And we also had a women in tech program. And so it's a great opportunity for companies that are looking to scale their enterprise, how to learn from Silicon Valley best practices, how to grow their company and raise funds and become a global leader. And because we covered so many different areas, it's a great resource for companies who want to expand their operations. And like I said, I'm proud of the fact that we've had some great Atlantic Canadian companies go through the program and continue to draw from that area.
Well, that's great to hear, Terry. In fact, the Chamber has recently launched a trade accelerator program with ISED, like many World Trade Centers across the country. And we successfully had 15 companies in that in our first cohort in February and had planned for another cohort in May, but we'll likely be doing that in the fall. So I will ensure that as we do this, we might have a technology focus, and we'll reach out. And I would encourage either of you, if you do get to Halifax, we'd love to have you speak to our members, whether it may be virtually over the next little while, or perhaps even live and in person, to kind of get the message out about the opportunities. So thank you very much for joining us, Rana and Terry, today. It's been great to chat with you about Canadian trade, Silicon Valley, and how we can push through this and come out stronger than ever. We certainly do live in interesting times, although I could deal with a little less interest at this point. Thank you very much, Rana, for your comments on Nova Scotia and on Jen Casey. Although I didn't know Jen well, I certainly knew many of her close friends, and they've all had wonderful things to say about her over the last week, sadly. So thank you very much, everyone. Tune in next time on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks, everybody, and bye-bye from the Halifax Chamber.
Tune in next time at halifaxchamber.com/podcast. The Halifax Chamber is in your corner.